Austin Knudsen was sworn in as Montana's 25th Attorney General on January the 4th, 2021. Prior to that, he was elected to the Montana House of Representatives in 2010. From 2015 to 2019, he served as the Speaker of the Montana House of Representatives. Gentner Drummond was sworn in as Oklahoma's 19th Attorney General on January the 9th, 2023. Mr. Drummond's law experience spans nearly 30 years and includes service as an assistant district attorney in Pawnee and Osage counties, and as an attorney in private practice. Andrew Bailey was sworn in as the 44th Attorney General of the state of Missouri on January the 3rd, 2023. Mr. Bailey is a veteran of the United States Army, in which he served in combat as a commissioned officer following the terrorist attacks of September 11. Mr. Frank Bowman is the University of Missouri's Curator's Distinguished Professor Emeritus and Floyd R. Gibson Missouri Endowed Professor of Law Emeritus at the University of Missouri School of Law. He has also taught at Georgetown University Law Center, Washington and Lee University, Gonzaga University, Indiana University's McKinney School of Law, Wake Forest University, and the University of Denver. And in spring of 2023, was visiting fellow at Oxford University's Rothermere American Institute. I thank all the witnesses for being here today, and I now recognize Mr. Knudsen for 5 minutes to summarize his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Chairman Green, Ranking Member Thompson, members of the distinguished committee. My name is Austin Knudsen, Montana Attorney General. As the Attorney General and Chief Law Enforcement Officer for the state of Montana, I'm grateful for this committee's attention to how Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas' failed leadership has impacted states like Montana. The southern border certainly presents a difficult challenge for any administration, but Secretary Mayorkas and the Biden administration have absolutely poured gasoline on this fire. The southern border and the drugs flowing across it into communities large and small across our nation are ultimately the reason that I am the Attorney General of Montana today. I'm from rural Montana, where I was a private practice attorney until two drug dealers sped past my kids' school, one shooting at the other out his vehicle window in broad daylight. After that incident, I became our elected county prosecutor, where I saw what I thought were the absolute worst things possible. Babies born addicted to drugs, kids thrown into foster care because their parents would rather buy drugs than take care of them, young girls sexually assaulted by family members on drugs, people murdered over $20 drug deals gone wrong. So to say that I was encouraged by the previous administration's progress in securing our nation's border is an understatement. It's also an understatement to say that I was horrified to see this administration under Secretary Mayorkas' leadership begin to erase that progress and systematically dismantle policies and programs meant to secure our borders. The most devastating impact of the open border on Montana has been the massive quantities of Mexican cartel fentanyl and methamphetamine. In 2020, drug task forces in Montana seized 6,663 dosage units of fentanyl. In 2021, the first year of Secretary Mayorkas' watch at the border, that quantity exploded tenfold to 61,000 dosage units of fentanyl. In 2022, Montana tripled that, seizing nearly 190,000 dosage units of cartel fentanyl. The numbers aren't finalized yet for 2023, but I can tell you that as of the third quarter of 2023, Montana is on track to have seized nearly 500,000 dosage units of fentanyl and another 200 pounds of meth. And the cartels trafficked 100% of that fentanyl and meth across the southern border. In just 1 week during March 2022, 17 people on the Blackfeet Indian Reservation overdosed on fentanyl. 4 of them died. I spoke with a woman later that year from the Fort Peck Indian Reservation, which is where I'm from. She was raising her grandkids because both of her sons were killed in 2 separate fentanyl overdose incidents. Nationwide, Indigenous people suffer the highest rate of fentanyl overdoses. In Montana, the opioid overdose death rate among Native Americans is twice that of white people. The devastation of Secretary Mayorkas' refusal to faithfully execute the laws goes beyond the deaths it causes and the anguished families left to pick up pieces. These drugs cause people to do absolutely unspeakable things. A suspect in a current drug case in Montana was taking delivery of drugs that were being supplied directly from the cartels in Mexico. She kept her minor daughter living in a yard shed and allowed the man delivering those drugs to sexually assault her daughter as part of that drug deal. In another case last year, a young mother who was homeless was able to finally find a bedroom in a house, not knowing that that room had been recently occupied by a fentanyl user. Shortly after taking residence, that mother found her 11-month-old child not breathing. Fortunately, medical and law enforcement personnel responded quickly enough to administer naloxone before the fentanyl from the prior occupant killed that infant child. The Trump administration overcame fierce opposition at every turn and was able to gain control of our southern border as no previous administration could. But all of that progress has been destroyed. Secretary Mayorkas is the architect of that destruction. The American people are watching. They know that our border was secure just a few years ago. They see the devastation metastasizing in our communities from drugs and human trafficking. The conclusion is clear. Secretary Mayorkas has violated his oath, and I urge this body to impeach. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Knudsen. I now recognize Mr. Drummond for 5 minutes to summarize his opening statement.
Good morning, Chairman Green, Ranking Member Thompson, and members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me to participate today in this hearing on this critical issue. I am Gentner Drummond, and I was elected Oklahoma's Attorney General in 2022. As the Chief Law Enforcement Officer of Oklahoma, it is my duty to protect the people of my state. I'm here to testify about the dangers my citizens face due to a porous border and the failure of our federal government to enforce its laws. In the early evening of November 20, 2022, law enforcement responded to a quadruple homicide after a Chinese national allegedly entered a garage on a 10-acre marijuana farm in rural Oklahoma. According to investigators, the assailant killed 3 men, execution style, with gunshots to the back of their head, and 1 woman with 2 shots to her abdomen. The carnage of that day is but one tragic example of a failed system plagued by failing leadership. Throughout Oklahoma, law enforcement comes into contact daily with foreign nationals who have entered our country illegally or who remain here illegally or both. This is all too common in Oklahoma's illegal marijuana grow operations. The voters of Oklahoma legalized medical marijuana in 2018. While that legalization led to the legitimate cannabis business-related businesses throughout our state, organized criminals have overtaken the industry. Our law enforcement partners report that the foreign nationals most often involved in these illegal enterprises come from China and Mexico. The one thing these criminals have in common is that they have no regard for our laws or public safety. Criminal illegal immigrants are not content with growing only black market marijuana. They also produce and distribute fentanyl, and they engage in sex trafficking and labor trafficking. Oklahoma's law enforcement community fights a constant battle against these evils. The Oklahoma Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs, the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation, and scores of local law enforcement agencies deserve much praise for their great and heroic efforts. While there have been many great successes, the ongoing border crisis ensures a never-ending flood of illegal foreign nationals who continue to perpetrate crimes that endanger our people. When I was sworn in as Attorney General, I pledged to the people of my state that I would do everything in my power to protect them from these dangerous criminals. I petitioned our legislature for greater resources and broader authority to combat the threat. They responded with millions of dollars for equipment and personnel, and they granted my office more power to fight this criminal epidemic being fueled by our border crisis. In response, I established the Organized Crime Task Force, the first of its kind for Oklahoma, and it is needed primarily because federal officials have failed to enforce the laws and to secure our border. In the short 7 months since its creation, the Organized Crime Task Force has investigated and is prosecuting more than 50 complex, multi-jurisdictional criminal cases. The vast majority of these cases involve Mexican or Chinese drug syndicates. These illegal foreign actors burden my state with additional costs that cannot be fully quantified. For instance, the Oklahoma Department of Corrections reports that it is currently housing more than 500 illegal immigrants convicted of various violent crimes. Before those criminal aliens were sent to the Department of Corrections, they were in custody of our local jails, which have their own costs for housing. Likewise, there is a significant cost for law enforcement in the investigating of these crimes and for the prosecutors who prosecute them. The unsecured border contributes to costs beyond the criminal justice system as well. While it is not possible to ascertain the exact amount of the cost, it is easy to understand the magnitude. Illegal immigration costs Oklahoma taxpayers more than $750 million each year with a minimal offset return. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I believe it is time for accountability. The people of Oklahoma don't deserve to live under constant threat from criminal foreign nationals. We don't deserve to have our communities flooded with illegal drugs that were smuggled across an unsecure border. And we don't deserve to have our loved ones ripped away by those same drugs. I ask you to remember the people of Oklahoma as you deliberate. Remember the murder victims. Remember the drug overdose victims and the families who mourn them. And of course, please remember the law enforcement officers who risk their lives every day to protect us from it all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Drummond. I now recognize Mr. Bailey for 5 minutes to summarize his opening statement.
Distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you this morning. My understanding of border security comes from direct, hands-on experience securing a nation's border. It was earned on a barren desert battlefield half a world away from the turret of an M2 Bradley fighting vehicle. In 2005, as a newly minted second lieutenant in the United States Army, my platoon deployed to the Nineveh province, Iraq, under the command of then Colonel H.R. McMaster. It was tasked with securing the border between Iraq and Syria. Our mission was simple: close the border. And that's exactly what we did. We did not capture people and release them into the interior of the country. We did not hand out citations and ask individuals to report back in 10 years. No, we closed the border to ensure the country was safe. Since 2021, more than 8 million illegal immigrants have entered the United States, and that is more than the population of my home state of Missouri. These numbers are not an accident. There is only one reason 8 million people illegally cross a sovereign nation's border: because they know that they can get away with it. And why wouldn't they? In the last 3 years of Secretary Mayorkas' reign, there has been an orchestrated lack of enforcement of our nation's immigration laws. He has failed to do that which is most fundamental to his mission: protect our border. That failure has not only led to today's impeachment proceeding, it has given rise to an unprecedented level of state actions necessary to fill the vacuum created by the Secretary's refusal to do his job. I'd like to highlight for you a few of the actions my office has taken as we fight to secure the southern border. One of those is our fight to force him to finish President Trump's border wall. In an interview last Wednesday on CNN, Secretary Mayorkas stated, "We need additional resources and we need them now." Our lawsuit proves he already has funding, he just refuses to use it. In fiscal year 2020, Congress appropriated funds explicitly for the purpose of constructing barrier systems at our southern border to keep unauthorized individuals out of our country. In the appropriation, Congress explicitly stated the money shall only be available for the construction of barrier systems along the southwest border. Secretary Mayorkas and his administration refused to comply with Congress's command. Missouri immediately filed suit. DHS attempted to argue we did not have standing to challenge its refusal to use the funds, but the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that states can indeed bring such a challenge. That ruling cleared the way for our lawsuit against the Secretary's refusal to finish President Trump's border wall, and it allowed the lawsuit to move forward. So while we battle in court over Secretary Mayorkas' refusal to use taxpayer dollars in the manner Congress explicitly prescribed, we have little sympathy for his pleas for more resources. Rather than find ways to secure our border, Secretary Mayorkas has been busy enacting policies to make it easier to enter our country illegally. We filed suit again against Secretary Mayorkas for allowing hundreds of thousands of illegal immigrants to be paroled into the United States every year. Parole allows non-citizens to physically enter and remain in the United States for up to 2 years or even longer while their application is reviewed without lawful status. We also filed suit to halt Secretary Mayorkas' attempt to implement a rule that redefined what had previously been considered an illegal border crossing as a lawful pathway. Rather than acknowledge the root cause of the influx of illegal immigrants pouring over our border, the Secretary tried to define the problem away by simply making something that was once illegal something legal without congressional authorization. Mayorkas' process would allow vast numbers of illegal immigrants to enter the country and receive instant work authorization under bogus asylum claims. Secretary Mayorkas has enacted illegal policies that are akin to posting a "come in, we're open" sign along the southern border. Without taking responsibility for the consequences of his actions, states are then forced to bear the enormous cost of Secretary Mayorkas' failure. The states should not need to do the federal government's job for them. Secretary Mayorkas swore an oath to faithfully execute the laws of our land. In Missouri, we remove officials who do not do their jobs because we have seen firsthand the catastrophic toll it takes on entire communities. My office was forced to take action to remove a Soros-backed prosecuting attorney from office for her refusal to do her job that resulted in the killing and maiming of countless Missourians. Since we took action, order has been restored to the city of St. Louis. It is rightful for Congress to consider removing a government official who refuses to do his job for the same reason, to restore order. We have reached a point of no return. We're doing everything we can at the state level to rectify this disaster, but Congress has a role to play for accountability. While we battle in the nation's courts, Congress must use every tool at its disposal to obtain accountability for the American people. I thank the committee for its time and welcome its questions.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. I now recognize Mr. Bowman for 5 minutes to summarize his opening statement.
Chairman Green, Ranking Member Thompson, members of the committee, I'm honored to address this committee, and I'm also pleased to share the witness table with 3 distinguished elected officials, one of whom, immediately to my right, Mr. Bailey, I last remember seeing around 2011 as a second-year law student in my evidence class at Mizzou. As Attorney General of Missouri, he's surely come up in the world. Congratulations to you from an old professor. I, on the other hand, remain simply an old professor. I understand this to be the first in a series of hearings on whether constitutional grounds exist to impeach Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. The testimony so far has focused on the performance of Secretary Mayorkas and the Biden administration relating to immigration policy and enforcement. I'm not an expert on immigration policy. I will not comment on it here. I have, however, been studying constitutional standards for impeachment for over 25 years. I've written numerous articles and a book on the history of impeachment from its origins in England in 1376 through the 2 impeachments of President Trump. My subject, therefore, will be the constitutional standard for impeaching a cabinet officer. The key point about impeachment in our Constitution is that it is not supposed to be a routine tool to resolve ordinary public policy debates, even very passionate ones. Debates between political parties or between one house of Congress and the executive branch. It is instead a measure of last resort, reserved, as one framer put it, for great and dangerous offenses. In other words, for official misconduct which is extraordinarily serious in degree and critically of a type that corrupts or subverts governmental processes or the constitutional order itself. That the framers intended impeachment to be rare is obvious from their decision that conviction requires 2/3 of the Senate. That they intended to rule it out as a weapon of ordinary political debate is plain from how they defined impeachable conduct. The Constitution provides that the President, Vice President, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. A cabinet secretary is a civil officer subject to impeachment, but a cabinet secretary, like the President, is not impeachable unless he's proven to have committed treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. There's no suggestion that I'm aware of that Secretary Mayorkas has committed either treason or bribery. Hence, any article of impeachment against him must establish that he committed high crimes and misdemeanors. The framers chose the English parliamentary term of art, high crimes and misdemeanors, rather than other possible terms like maladministration, because they wanted a flexible term that could reach unanticipated new forms of grave official misconduct, but equally and critically because they did not want an impeachment that would be the equivalent of a vote of no confidence in modern parliamentary systems, a vote that could remove the president or other executive branch officials between elections whenever the legislature disapproves of administration policy. For over 2 centuries, students of the Constitution have universally agreed, in the words of the great impeachment scholar Charles Black, that whatever may be the grounds for impeachment and removal, dislike of a president's policy is certainly not one of them. To be properly impeachable, official conduct must meet a very high threshold of seriousness. It must also be of a type that corrupts and subverts the political and governmental process, and it ought to be plainly wrong regardless of legal technicalities. The most commonly encountered categories of impeachable conduct are official corruption, abuse of power, betrayal of the nation's foreign policy interests, and subversion of the Constitution. There is no serious allegation of which I'm aware that the Secretary has done any of those things. Now, some might mischaracterize the Secretary's implementation of the President's policy priorities as an abuse of power. But impeachable abuse of power involves employing the powers of office for illegal or illegitimate ends, particularly to gain personal, political, or financial advantage, to benefit personal or political allies, or to injure political or personal enemies, and especially when the abusive exercise of official power undermines constitutional values. Following the policy directives of one's elected superior in pursuit of that superior's policy aims is simply not an impeachable abuse of power. Finally, impeachment of a cabinet secretary over policy agreements is not only contrary to long-established constitutional understanding, but useless as a practical matter. If the official actions of the officer are in accord with the directives of his elected superior, the president removing the secretary changes nothing. If members of this committee disapprove of the Biden administration's immigration and border policies, the Constitution gives this Congress a wealth of legislative powers to change them. Impeachment is not one of those powers.
The leader disagrees.